Chapter 962. Under the bright moonlight, the group left the cloud-capturing pavilion. Pei Qian pulled Li Baoping back to her residence. Reuniting after such a long time, there were too many things they could talk about. After Qin Pingan and Cui Dongshan's confirmation, Chao Qingling did not have any hidden dangers. However, Cui Dongshan still suggested that Chao Qingling should not be in a rush to officially refine the sword. She should wait until she stabilized her Jindan stage before going into seclusion at Stellar Scenic Peak. Chao Qingling had no objections to this. Chao Qingling left with Zheng Yuqian. Their residences were very close to each other. Walking on the quiet mountain road in the dead of night, Zheng Yuqian asked tentatively, "Senior Chao, can I talk to you about something?" Mainly because he felt that this student of junior uncle was cultured and refined. One look and he could tell that he was very capable in his studies. That's right, Senior Chao was that Dali dynasty's top scorer. Every time Master mentioned this, he would be rather happy. Chapter 963. Long Xinpu stared blankly at the handsome young man wearing the tiger head hat. Could it be? For a moment, he felt dizzy and the world was spinning. Definitely not. Even in the world, there were countless people who worshipped, admired, and were fascinated by the most prized Taoist official in the world. Long Xinpu was one of them. Moreover, this Master Long had a friend who sewed hundreds of poems by Bai Yi onto his body. If that guy saw the person in front of him, he would probably go crazy on the spot. It would be like a bolt from the blue, and he would suffer a lightning tribulation. Chapter 964. The book said that all good things must come to an end, but there was no need to be afraid. The book also said that it was a small world. Note 1. The guests left the secret snow peak one after another. The largest group of people took the Tongyin ferry that had just been acquired by the Qingping sword sect and headed to Taiping Mountain. Other than the new mountain lord Huang Ting of Taiping Mountain, there was also the mountain protector Yu Fushan and the honorary protector Tanning Zhou and Zheng Yuqian. Since Zhang Shanfeng was going to continue to travel around the Tongya continent, he could travel with Li Baoping, who was planning to go to the driving mountain ferry. Pei Qian was going to follow sister Baoping. They were all carrying bamboo boxes and holding green bamboo staffs. They planned to go to Taiping Mountain first before going to the cloud cottage of Mount Pu. Yi Yunyun let Tan Rong and Xue Huai return to the sect first. She also wanted to go to the old site of Taiping Mountain to take a look. Zhong Kuei and Eugene also wanted to follow. When Zhong Kuei was still a gentleman in the Dafu Academy, he was already very familiar with Taiping Mountain. As for the fatty, he had his own reasons to be the flower protector. Yuanling Hall looked like he didn't need to protect his junior brother anymore. Yuanling Hall left the Tongya continent first. However, he didn't return to Tiandi Peak. Instead, he went straight to the sea and went to the wasteland through the ruins of End to find his master Fire Dragon Immortal. The Tongyin ferry slowly rose into the sky. After passing through layers of clouds, it suddenly swam far away like a blue bird. Chapter 965. Baek Ok Kyung Building, Azure Cloud Building, Mist Cave of Jinyu Palace. There was a young-looking cultivator. He was thin, his face was haggard, and his cheeks were sunken. His expression was solemn, and he seemed to have a lot on his mind. He sat cross-legged on the peak of the mountain and looked down at a long clay tablet. There seemed to be a prophecy written on it with iron nails. His fingers were badly mutilated. It was really a nail on the board. Chapter 966. This time, crossing the sea to return to the north, he had roughly estimated the speed of the visitor from the Luo Pa mountain heading south, so he was not particularly in a hurry. Along the way, Chun Pingan practiced the escape technique of the sword technique. His figure transformed into dozens of sword lights time and time again. Above the blue waves, he used an escape technique that almost ignored the long river of time to leisurely roam the world. Accurately speaking, all the sword lights could follow some of the small water veins in the long river of time, like walking water between the heavens and the earth, like a person entering an uninhabited place. Chun Pingan went through tens of thousands of repetitive studies and finally, The first time he used this escape technique with Ning Yao, they were about the same level of proficiency. Perhaps this was called "the clumsy bird flies first," and hard work can make up for it. They temporarily rested on an island in the sea near the Aquarius continent. Chun Pingon squatted on a tree branch, cupped his hands, and used the water technique. His palms were like spring water gushing out, and then he scooped up a handful of water to wash his face. Xiao Emo sat at the side, the green bamboo cane placed horizontally on his knees, and said, "Young master has good talent." Chun Pingon laughed angrily. "Stop saying things that go against my conscience. Flattery is useless to me." Chapter 967. The snow and the moon were suitable for each other, and the youth was even more aloof. Including this guy who called himself Cui Dongshan, there were a total of 6 people. Together, they walked towards the large mansion with a 6,000-scroll library. A skinny monkey-like man walked at the front, using his feet to clear the path so that the woman's embroidered shoes wouldn't be soaked by the snow. The woman named Wang Manmeng claimed to be at the sea viewing realm, but she didn't like to be addressed as a fairy. The skinny man had once flattered a horse and received a slap. Along the way, she chatted idly with the handsome youth who called himself Cui Dongshan. Of course, a woman who came from a wild cultivation background hid many delicate thoughts under her flower-like smile. It was similar to the road under the snow. It looked snow-white and flawless, but if you really used your feet to push it aside, you would see that it was muddy. Chapter 968. In the snowy night, a group of 5 people walked towards the city gate in the snow. The mountains and rivers of the continent were mostly like these ghost cities that were dilapidated and uninhabited. They were like skeletons that had not yet decayed. When the wind swept past the city, it was like a bone flute. A thin young man with long eyebrows and a cold appearance. He held a knife under his armpit. The young man held a tightly squeezed snowball in his hand. He tossed it with his left and right hands. The old man was tall and sturdy. His footsteps were steady, but he kept coughing as if he could not stand the cold. Chapter 969. Sorry, update late. The snow was white, and his clothes were white like snow. It was as if he was a snowman. Qinbai felt that this person was a little familiar, but she couldn't match him even after carefully searching her memory. Cui Dongshan and Qinbai squeezed out a big, bright smile. Then, they lowered their voices and begged old Senior Song to move and watch the battle with him from a distance, lest the 2 martial artists of the ultimate state couldn't display their skills in this mountaintop querying fist. Then, he took Wang Manmeng and the others away from the city gate. Cui Dongshan planned to choose the roof of a big mansion as the place to watch the battle. However, in this windy and snowy night, the snow was heavy and the wind was strong, so their vision was blocked. Qian Monkey and the others were too weak, so they were destined to not be able to see the 2 sides clearly. Cui Dongshan had tampered with the conversation between Mr. and Han Wanzhan, so Wang Manmeng couldn't hear it clearly. When they found out the identities of the 2 sides in the future, they would regret it to death. The 2 sides faced each other on the street, not in a hurry to make a move. Chapter 970. They sat on the railing of the arched bridge, just like in the past. Chun Pingon suddenly said, "I once heard an incredible conjecture, saying that the world we live in has actually cycled countless times, and it's a kind of repetition that doesn't change at all. All living things and dead things are in a tribulation. When the tribulation rises, the world is born, and when the tribulation falls, the world is destroyed, and then it starts again. The cycle is repeated without any difference. However, there are different opinions about the number of years of this tribulation. Some say it's 30,000 years, some say it's 100,000 years, or even longer. Therefore, later generations have the saying that it's hard to escape the tribulation. The sages have already said it, but they can't see through it. Is it really like this?" She quietly listened to Chen Pingon's words. When the latter asked, she smiled and said, "It's a good idea. It's new and interesting, but it's far from the topic. It's ridiculously wrong." Chapter 971. Snow covered the entire mountain. The ground was white, and the wind was cold. In the snowy peak, the sound of branches breaking could be heard. In this celestial capital mountain, other than the sect leader Cui Dongshan, the only one who could freely enter the grotto heaven was the right guardian of Luo Pa Mountain, Zhou Mili. Even the head consecrated Miyu and the head consecrated Cui Wei, who were the masters of two potential sword immortals, had to register if they wanted to enter the grotto heaven. Early in the morning, Bai Xian held the Yixing clay teapot and brewed a pot of wolfberry tea for himself. Although he was tricked by Jing Qing, he got used to it. Bai Xian raised his head and took a big gulp of wolfberry tea. Then, he said to Xiao Mili, who was sitting across the table, "Right guardian, my heart is bitter. When it comes to drinking tea, I am an experienced connoisseur." Xiao Mili immediately said, "Then drink the wild mountain tea personally made by the old chef. It's bitter before it's sweet. This is called having a sweet taste." Chapter 972. Huaihuang County's Dragon Riding Alley turned into an ascension stage in a split second. At the top was still a woman holding a sword, while the man beside her sat on the steps. Both of them had a pair of extremely pure golden eyes. The body of the mink hat girl, Xiago, instantly dissipated like dust and then condensed into a slender woman with a brand new appearance. Bai Jing held his sword with both hands and raised his head high to meet the eyes of the two at the top. This was Bai Jing's true body and appearance. Chapter 973. A Fengyuan ferry headed south to Tongya continent. Midway, it stopped at Peachleaf Ferry outside Mirage City. Song Yusher was still dressed in a green robe and cloth shoes. He boarded the ferry alone. According to the agreement with the Great Spring Dynasty, the ferry would help transport a batch of goods to Jade Sex Beaching Ferry and Tsushan Ferry, which were located in the southernmost part of Tongya continent. They don't see Tiger Han and Jianming accompanying them. Miyu looks playful. Zhou Mili hangs on the railing and kicks her legs gently. It's a pity that they still can't see the Emperor of Daquan, who Pei Qian said was as beautiful as a flower when he was a child. Pei Qian was still talking about the beautiful sister named Yao Jinji back then. When she looked at her master's eyes, she thought that he was full of drama. After all the goods were loaded onto the ferry, the Fengyuan continued south. Chun Pingon accompanied Song Yusher for a few drinks. Song Yusher said that the prefectural magistrate had been very busy recently and couldn't get away. The fact that Grandmaster Han was willing to take the initiative to be the imperial tutor of Great Spring shocked the entire country. Chapter 974. At the highest point of the Baek Okkyung building, a young Taoist with a lotus crown on his head leaned on the railing and smiled. Since he had nothing to do, he might as well look at the world from a quiet place. In the eyes of the sisters in the 5 cities and 12 buildings below, he would at least have some celestial aura. Lu Chen looked at the palace of a tall city. Someone had just received a decree from the sect master and was about to leave. He was ordered to come to the Shangqing Pavilion to meet Lu Chen. Some immortals had already sensed the trajectory of this person's ascension and were envious of this person's encounter. After all, it was an honor to be able to climb to the top of the Shangqing Pavilion and overlook the entire 5 cities and 12 buildings. Lu Chen waved at the green figure and smiled. "Celestial Lord Yang. Over here, over here." The young Taoist landed softly and stood in the corridor. He bowed respectfully to Lu Chen and said, "Yang Ningxing of Lingbao City greets Sect Master Lu." Lu Chen smiled and waved his hand. "No need for formalities. How many times have I said it? You can just call me Martial Uncle. Since you and Chun Pingon are good friends who call each other brothers, then you and I are best friends. There are no outsiders here. So, who are you being polite to? Isn't that reasonable?" Chapter 975. Uploaded late. Sorry. In the night, the Wind Kite Ferry slowly docked at the Jade City Ferry of the Jade Gui sect. This famous immortal ferry had warm mountains and soft water. The lake was like a mirror. The moonlight shone on the ground, and the lanterns floated in the sky. On the ferry, Everyone walked out of their cabins to enjoy the scenery. They were divided into two groups. On one side was Miyu and Zhou Mili. On the other side was Wei Wenlong, Tao Ran, Xiao Poxian, and the others. Nalan smiled and said, "Great sword immortal me. Looking at this beautiful scenery, don't you want to recite a poem?" As a child born and raised in the Great Wall of Sword Qi, she spoke casually to Miyu. Nalan was already polite. Yuan Zhaohua, who was hiding in the cold palace in Ascension City, used to be the king of children. She often led a large group of people of the same age to fly kites. She was closer to Miyu, who liked to lie in the clouds and admire the moon. Chapter 976. Red Candle Town, the first month of the year, still had a festive atmosphere to it. As a trade hub, the various provinces of Dali had set up many guilds here. Old faces and new couplets, everyone was in a festive mood. The young shopkeeper of a bookstore was currently napping on a rattan chair. The matters of the Water Mansion had been handed over to his subordinates to manage. He had learned from Luapa Mountain's Mountain Lord Chen and become a hands-off shopkeeper. A travel-worn person crossed the threshold, cupped his fists with a smile, and said something pleasing. "Shopkeeperly, it's an auspicious opening. I wish for your business to prosper and prosper." Li Jin saw Chen Pingon and sat up from his chair. Since both sides knew each other well, Li Jin didn't make any pretentious greetings. He didn't even stand up to greet him, only cupping his fists in return. Business is indeed going well. Chen Pingon was happy that Li Jin didn't take him seriously. He entered the bookstore and glanced at the bookshelves. His gaze stopped at one spot and asked, "Why is there a missing copy of the 27 Histories and 100 Generals?" Chapter 977. The spring feng shui was warm, and the scenery was charming. There were a few peach blossoms on the shore, and the wild ducks in the water chased after the clear scenery. Wang Zhu and the others went ashore in Tongya Island, ready to visit the opportunistic Yu dynasty that took the initiative to curry favor with the Water Lord of the East Sea. However, after a few steps, they bumped into the young man in white with a red mole between his eyebrows. This was the second time they met face to face. The first time was at the old site of the Great Desecration Dragon Palace. The retainers of the Water Mansion had a deep impression of this person. Of course, the one who really scared them was the sword cultivator in yellow hat and green shoes, Xiao Mo, who called the young hermit young master. His realm was so high that it was unattainable. Wang Zhu and Cui Dongshan had known each other for a long time, and they could be considered as half fellow countrymen, so they were accustomed to it. However, Gong Yan, Huang Man, and the others looked at the funny posture of that guy, and they always felt that this teenager's behavior was both disgusting and scary at the same time. They were all successful cultivators, and they were once heroes in their respective continents. They had seen a lot of strange people and strange things on the mountain, but this teenager in white standing on one leg, holding a mirror in his hand, and full of nonsense, was unique. Seeing that they didn't respond, Cui Dongshan seemed to have made up his mind. If they didn't do something, then they would be in a standoff until the end of time. Chapter 978. Chen Pingon and Xiao Mo gradually climbed higher. Homesickness was nothing more than the people and things of one's hometown. Old Chef's table of home-cooked dishes could always make people eat to their heart's content, and it could always make people from other places worry about it. On the steps of the mountain road, Julien sat and the little girl in pink stood. Old Chef waved his hand, and Chen Wanshu, the master who had returned home, and Mr. Xiao Mo who had returned to the mountain, bowed from a distance. At the mountain gate behind them, the immortal lieutenant helped the boy in red to mark the roll. The little incense man stood on the Taoist's shoulder with his hands on his hips, looking at the back of the mountain master and silently muttering, "The mountain master's elegant demeanor is really admirable. The mountain master treats people like a spring breeze." The boy in red was deeply moved. He lifted his foot and stepped hard on the Taoist priest's shoulder, feeling very envious. He said, "Immortal Lieutenant, your luck has changed. I never thought that there would be such a heroic and virtuous person in the world. Headmaster Pei really treats people with sincerity. Immortal Lieutenant, you're going to be rich. Chun Pingon asked in his mind, with your An Bai Jing skills, can you see the real face under Zhu Lian's mask? Chapter 979. At 5 o'clock, the sky was slightly bright. There was a lot of fog in the mountains and the atmosphere was fresh. The morning dew condensed on the flowers and leaves, and the flowers swayed. Chun Pingon had a cotton bag under his arm. He chose a path to the back of the mountain and walked alone, feeling relaxed and happy. Stopping, Chun Pingon turned his head and looked. After a moment, he saw a stooped old man walking quickly toward him, holding a flower branch in his hand. In the eyes of ordinary people, Mi Jianxian would be considered romantic if he did this, but the old chef in front of him was a little shameless. Zhu Lian clenched his fist and pressed it against his abdomen. He held the flower branch behind him like holding a sword. He laughed loudly and said, "It's better to be early than early. I met you here." The young master always did things quietly and decisively in the spring wind and rain. Chapter 980. In the early morning of the Mirage City, the capital of the Great Spring Dynasty, the rain has just stopped. The willows are swaying in the wind, and the green and yellow colors are only half-balanced. Poets can describe this scene, but ordinary people can't describe it, but they can see it clearly. 3 carriages slowly stop on a street in the west of the capital. A group of men and women get off the carriages. There is a lotus pond next to them. A slender woman in brocade clothes doesn't rush to the destination. Instead, she walks to the edge of the pond and reaches out her snow-white hand to hold the cool blue stone railing. After the rain, round leaves float on the water. This woman is more beautiful than the beautiful scenery. She bent her fingers and wiped her palms. Then, she casually turned her wrist and turned her head to look. They did not disturb her from admiring the scenery. They just stood at the entrance of the street and waited patiently. Among them, there was a man with an empty sleeve hanging straight down. Beside him stood a seemingly gentle woman with a saber. She smiled knowingly. It was hard for her to be the matchmaker for them. The men and women of the Yao family's generation were not young anymore. The only one who did not have a place to settle down was the capital's magistrate. Just because he narrowly escaped death on the battlefield, he ended up with a lame leg and lost an arm. These years, he was suspected of being a broken jar. Of course, her younger brother's standards were indeed high. He naturally looked down on some of the noble women who fawned over him because of his status and title. This group of people is the Great Spring Empress Yao Jinji. The female cultivator standing next to Yao Xianji, the magistrate of the capital city, was Lu Yi. Her nickname was Yuanyang, and her Taoist name was Yifu. Lu Yi was now a third-class consecrator of the Great Spring Dynasty. Not long ago, the imperial court had transferred her to the Yin office of the Mirage Mansion to serve as Yao Xinji's personal retinue. Of course, the emperor was abusing his position for personal gain, but Lu Yi did not refuse. The new imperial tutor, Han Guanghu, is from the Golden Armor continent. The chief minister of worship, Lu Zong, comes from the Lotus Flower Blessed Land. The young man is concise, and his Taoist name is Yurenj. He comes from the Aquarius continent and carries a Taoist sword called Ming Quan under his arm. There was also a woman whose wrinkles could no longer be concealed. She was Yao Lingji, the younger sister of the Great Spring Empress and the elder sister of the magistrate of the capital city. Ever since she lost the famed spring, she had completely stopped dealing with people from the Jianghu and Lulin. Chapter 981. The Yu dynasty was called the Dragon God. After parting with Cui Dongshan, Wang Zhu only brought Gong Yan and Wang Qiongju with him. As for the other 3 retainers of the Water Mansion, they were Taoist priest Huang Man, who is a ghost immortal, Li Ba, whose Taoist name was Zizhu, and Shi Man, who was born as an earth dragon. Since the 3 of them were recruited by the Green Duckweed Sword sect, they needed to investigate the future trend of the Great Blasphemy and the mountains and rivers along the way. They could not be spendthrifts who worked hard and had their wages deducted. As for Wang Zhu and the others, They were more like sightseeing along the way. They could not stop and rest depending on the mood of the water god of the Eastern Sea. Between the palace and the imperial city of Luojing, there was a white rice alley. The Jade Temple of Luojing's Jade Temple was located there. The temple was built with green glazed tiles made by the imperial kilns. Inside the temple, there were pine and cypress trees. The trees were old and green all year round, hence the name Jade Temple. However, Huang Man and the others arrived at Luojing earlier than the three of them, who had nothing to do. They were waiting at a tea stall at the entrance of a courier station outside the capital. Sure enough, at noon today, a simple carriage appeared on the official road. The coachman was the young man Wang Qiongju, with a red calabash on his back. Looking at his clothes, outsiders knew that he was a cultivator. A mortal teacher traveling outside would not be stupid enough to carry such an eye-catching calabash on his back. Chapter 982. In the Dragon Riding Alley's New Year shop, the white-haired boy sitting at the door basking in the sun looked a little listless. When he saw Chun Pingon, who had come to check the accounts, he just called out to him in a muffled voice. Compared to the past, it was slightly different. In the two neighboring shops, there was a long wooden bench that was the most common in rural villages. Neighbors could sit together and chat for a while if they had nothing to do. Chun Pingon sat aside, shook his green robe, crossed his legs, and asked with a smile, "Do you want to go to Tongya Continent to cultivate? There is a small cave there, whereby Xian, Qing Chaolu, and the other children are now practicing swordsmanship. I can ask Cui Dongshan to build you a Taoist field and mansion. I will pay for it. The whole territory of the sect, hundreds of miles around, is now our territory. When you get there, if you are interested, you can guide Qing Chaolu and the others in their cultivation. There is a little girl named Chai Wu, who is very talented in cultivation. She is Wei Xian's first disciple. You have diverse knowledge, so it should be no problem for you to teach anyone. If you have a mountain you like, you can tell Cui Dongshan that it is my idea and ask him to give it to you directly. Just treat it as the opening of the peak without holding a celebration. You can choose the identity of the ancestral hall of Qingping Peak. In the future, if you meet someone with good qualifications and want to accept a disciple, you can do whatever you want." Because of Bai Jing's arrival, the Dragon Riding Alley could easily attract some people's attention. On the other hand, the Qingping sword sect could hide people. A sword practitioner at the peak of the Ascendant Realm, especially one who had lived for tens of thousands of years, was far more eye-catching than a new sect in terms of identity and strength. Chapter 983. Together, they walked back to the stone arch bridge. Walking up the stairs, Chun Pingon walked to the center of the bridge. Suddenly, he stopped and sat down with his legs hanging off the bridge. The white-haired boy imitated him and sat at the side. Chun Pingon turned his head to look at Luo Pa Mountain. It seemed that Xiaomi had just patrolled to the ancestral hall of Jisei Peak and was not walking fast. Luo Pa Mountain's right guardian was very diligent in patrolling the mountain. He was famous for being unshakable and never lazed around in bed. Just like the boy in Red's monthly roll call, he admitted that compared to Deputy Leader Zhou, who patrolled the mountain every day, he was far inferior. While patrolling the mountain, when there was no one around, Xiaomi began to practice a set of martial arts secret techniques. It was the crazy demon sword technique that Pei Qian taught her. However, Pei Qian only used one hand to wield the sword. She was different. With one hand holding the walking stick and the other holding the golden shoulder pole, she wielded the sword with both hands. Chapter 984. After drinking a pot of wine, Chun Pingon had an idea and said goodbye, saying that he was going to the Northern Mountain Lord's residence. The girl in the mink hat chased after him and asked if he could return to Luopa Mountain. It was not a good idea to always be banished outside. It would delay Xiao Mo's cultivation. His aptitude for swordsmanship was not as good as hers. If he continued to waste time like this, she could practice swordsmanship anytime and anywhere. Ascendant realm perfection would only be more perfect, and the gap between them would widen. Xiao Mo would lose face, and Xiao Mo would not want to see her. Alas, men would suffer for their pride. When Chun Pingon heard this, he actually did not have the patience to chat with her. But looking at her posture, Xiego seemed to have made up her mind. If he did not give an explanation today, she would follow him all the way to Cloud Padding Mountain. Chun Pingon had to stand by the pavilion and ask her to give a reason that could convince her. Xiego said that when she returned to the mountain, she would be more cautious than before. She would learn from the left protector of Riding Dragon Alley and behave herself with her tail between her legs. If the Mountain Lord did not believe her, she would swear in the name of Master Bai Zhe. Chun Pingon asked her about the business of the shop in Riding Dragon Alley. She had just started doing business with Zhou Junchen, and now she was going to wash her hands of it? Xiego said that she would definitely not wash her hands of it. She would go to the shop every now and then. It was just that the business was really difficult to do. Just the Falu Street and Peach Leaf Alley had already sent people to block her and compete with her wits and courage. Chun Pingon said angrily, "Is there anyone who does business like you? In the first month, you put a notice on someone's door. Fortunately, you still have a bottom line and did not put it on the door gods' faces. You are flattering yourself." Xiego felt wronged and said, "I have already discussed with those door gods. Let's make it clear in advance that I did not invite the gods to come to the real world or capture ghosts on the mountain. I discussed it with those door gods, and they all said it was okay." Chun Pingon was speechless. After a moment of silence, he looked at the girl in the mink hat who was frowning and feeling wronged. He could only say, go back. When you reach Luapa Mountain, remember to speak less. Otherwise, if you are chased down the mountain again, no one can help you." After that, Chun Pingon used the earth-shrinking technique and hid himself in a secluded place. Then he walked to the foot of Mount Biyun. As the location of the Beiyu ancestral temple in the prefecture, there were many good men and women who came to Mount Biyun to offer incense. However, everyone knew that Mount Biyun was Wei Pai's place of enlightenment, but very few pilgrims were able to see the legendary Beiyu Mountain with their own eyes. Chapter 985. Chun Pingon took out the blade's strengthening gourd, and Lu Meng also took off the gourd ladle from his waist. They looked at each other and smiled. This was probably what Bai Ye's poem meant when he said he was in the mountains and in a secluded place. Lu Meng raised his head and drank a mouthful of wine. "Do you know the origin of these mountains in Liju Caves?" Chun Pingon nodded and said, "Cui Dongshan once told me some inside information. There are a total of 62 mountains in the west. Most of them are mountains from Gushu. There are more than 40 records. I guess it's the work of Mr. Marquis of 3 mountains and 9 marquises. I'll see if I have the chance to ask him face to face. But the Luapa Mountain under our feet, the cloud-spreading mountain in Wei Pai, and the dragon-slaying platform are all strange. There are no written records. The latter was recorded as Mount Jialio by Dali's Ministry of Revenue. It was sealed during the Spring Hui period. According to our local dialect, it's called Dragon Spine Mountain. There are many dragon-slaying cliffs halfway up the mountain. They have a mysterious origin. The only one who knows the real origin is Grandpa Yang." Lu Meng smiled and said, "Grandpa Yang? You mean Heavenly Lord Qing Tong?" Heavenly Lord Qing Tong was one of the 12 high gods. He was the ancestor of earthly immortals who controlled an ascension platform. Chapter 986. In the spring, the trees bloomed like brocade, and the orioles in the mountains rose and fell in flocks. Lu Meng smiled and said, "As a sect, Luopa Mountain has fewer registered cultivators. It had more than 10 vassal mountains, but it was strange to have more mountains and fewer people." In his impression, in the North Continent, Immortal Fire Dragon's sprawling peak was one of the few Daoist orthodoxies, with 4 Daoist meridians. The Taixia Liu's lineage had always been good at slaying demons and enslaving ghosts. They were the most experienced in the world. The Peach Mountain's Daoist cultivators were proficient in thunder spells. The Baiyun lineage's Qi cultivators were proficient in talisman formations. Furthermore, the Yuan Spirit Palace's Xian Finger lineage belonged to the Daoist Sword Celestial sect. On the other hand, Luopa Mountain did not have a common sect of immortals on a large scale. Perhaps in the matter of accepting disciples, the requirements for the members of the Hall of Ancestral Masters were not low. Chun Pingon smiled and said, over at Cui Dongshan's Qingping sword sect, perhaps in a few years, the number of people will multiply. Our sect Master Cui has great ambitions. He has declared that in the future, every time the lower sect attends the upper sect, he will cross continents to worship the ancestors. In terms of numbers, he must surpass Luo Pa Mountain. Chapter 987. The boundary between practicing martial arts and cultivating Taoism is actually not as clear as we think. I even have a conjecture that I can't verify for the time being. Every talisman cultivator on the mountain is born to be a martial artist in the golden body state. If you want to learn martial arts, you have to understand yourself first. Zhao Shixia. We'll start from the simplest breathing. Then we'll start from looking at you from above, like a cactus looking at the mountains and rivers. Chun Pingon did not teach Zhao Shixia the martial arts, nor was he in a hurry to feed Zhao Shixia punches. Instead, he first left 7 maps of human acupoints in the bamboo building, which corresponded to Chun Pingon's martial arts from the 3rd to the 9th realm. The maps deliberately erased the flesh, blood, tendons, and bones, leaving only the acupoints and meridians. They were as tall as the human body. There were more than 1,000 acupoints in the Qi Fu, which was far more than the number of ordinary Taoist cultivators knew. As for the acupuncture wooden figurines in the medicine shops in the market, naturally, it was even more incomparable. The 7 maps of different acupoints were scattered all over the place, shining brightly, with different colors. They illuminated the whole bamboo building, like brilliant maps of stars hanging in the void outside the sky. With every breath of Chun Pingon in the 7 portraits, many unusual phenomena such as the Milky Way, 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 the Milky Way. Chapter 988. At the end of the first month of the 6th year of Chunping, there was a torrential downpour in Chu province. At noon, it was still dark and gloomy as night, but suddenly, the thunderstorm stopped. After the rain, the mountain was washed with verdant greenery. The spring sun was warm, and the birds in the mountain were dancing on the branches. Drops of rain flew in the spring breeze. Chun Pingon had already lent the fist manual given by Kong Ho to Zhu Lian to read. Since the 2 sides had agreed to have a fist fight in the capital of Nanyuan Kingdom, then they would have a real fight. Xiao Yunyan and Madame Yan, who had been touring the mountains and rivers of the Baoping continent, were about to visit Luo Pa Mountain together. Because they had already sent a flying sword message in advance to inform Jisei Peak of the date of their trip, Chun Pingon brought Wei Wenlong to the mountain gate today to drink tea and wait for the guests. Chapter 989. At the school in Huaihuang County, classes had ended. It was still early, so the children from well-off families started flying kites. After drinking tea and talking about the scenery, Chun Pingon brought Xiao Yunyan and Madame Huayan out for a stroll around Luopa Mountain. They walked up the green mountain. The white was the clouds and the green was the trees. They did not know how many days had passed. They did not expect Xiao Yunyan to find an excuse to take a stroll by himself. This made Madame Huayan, who was alone with the young hermit, very nervous. Chun Pingon walked with her to the top of the mountain. A colorful knot that looked like a copper coin appeared in his hand. He smiled and asked, "You know this?" Chapter 990. In the corridor on the first floor of the bamboo building, Chun Pingon held a booklet in his hand. Nuan Shu and Xiaomi sat on his left and right. They tilted their heads and looked at the contents of the 3rd page of the chronicle. The white-haired boy said proudly, "My ambition is to edit and shine for thousands of years." Patriarch Hidden Official, if you hadn't reminded me that the chronicle needs to be simple and plain, the simpler the better, I would have let you know what it means to be brilliant. Chun Pingon smiled, rolled up the booklet, and knocked on the white-haired boy's head. Nuan Shu continued to sew cloth shoes with her head lowered, and Xiaomi immediately turned her head away. As Chun Pingon hit the white-haired boy, he laughed angrily and said, Can I trouble you to explain to me what those 3 annotations mean? It turned out that in the 6th year of Chunping, on the 27th day of the 1st month, Wind Thunder Garden's nascent Soul Realm Sword cultivator Lu Baqiao and 18-year-old Sea-Viewing Realm Sword cultivator Nangong Xingyan visited Luo Pa Mountain. They discussed with Mountain Master Chun Pingan about participating in Wind Thunder Garden's Golden Core Sword cultivator Xing Yuheng's peak opening ceremony. Mountain Master would go down the mountain this summer. On the 28th day of the 1st month, Lu Baqiao and Nangong Xingyan returned home through the Oxhorn Ferry. Note 1. Nangong Xingyan lied about his age. His real age is 21. Note 2. Lu Baqiao walked into the mountain and lent the Guanji sword talisman issued by the Dragon Spring Sword sect to Nangong Xingyan. Note 3. Mountain Master will pay for the gifts to participate in Wind Thunder Garden's peak opening ceremony from his own pocket or from Luo Pa Mountain's Spring Manor's treasury. It's not decided yet. Chapter 991. There was always someone better than you. The falling plum blossoms were like snow. Gao Jun did not think that he was being an alarmist or trying to deceive her. She could only sigh faintly. She had been diligent in her cultivation of immortal spells all these years. She did not expect that she would only have a 10% chance of winning against this banished immortal who had returned to the Blessed Land. Since he dared to come to the Lake Mountain sect alone, he must have something to rely on. Either he was strong enough, or he had help hidden in the dark. Moreover, during the siege in the capital city of the Nanyuan Kingdom, this young sword immortal was heavily surrounded. Eventually, he stood out and killed Ding Ying on the city wall. He stayed in the capital city and prevented Grandmaster Yu from stepping into the city. After this battle, he became famous all over the world. Chapter 992. At the end of the first lunar month, there was another snowfall in Chuzhou, but it was not heavy and was mixed with rain. It was sunny after the snow, and the mountains were green, except for Mount Biyun, which was half green and half white. Like a beautiful woman who lived in seclusion, wearing a fox fur coat and a green dress, or a scholar in the snow, she was different from the common people. That day, in the middle of the night in Lotus Root Blessed Land, in the twilight of the vast world, the Golden Core cultivator Gao Jun and the Golden Body cultivator Zhong Qian were guests at Luo Pa Mountain. However, they were arranged to stay in different mansions, so they did not meet for the time being. In the dead of the night, Gao Jun did not want to breathe and absorb the Reiki in the mountain. She would be suspected of being a thief if she took the Reiki without telling anyone. Since she could not concentrate on cultivation, she went out alone and walked up the stairs. At the top of Spirit Gathering Peak, Gao Jun saw a fellow cultivator who was enjoying the scenery under the moonlight. He was sitting on the railing with a wine cup in his hand and a green jade pot spring wine bottle beside him. He opened a bag of soy sauce meat and drank by himself. Gao Jun did not recognize him, but he recognized the leader of Lake Mountain faction at a glance. The woman was wearing an apricot yellow Taoist robe, beautiful like a lotus in autumn. Chapter 993. Chun Pingan smiled as he picked up the book from the ground and patted away the dust. Coincidentally, Xin Yuanji descended the mountain using the stump. Zhu Lian and Wei Ba also appeared at the Mountain Gates Memorial Arch with Nuan Shu and Xiaomi in tow. Chun Lingjuan's eyes were brimming with tears as he shouted at the top of his lungs, "Brother Wind!" Chun Pingan immediately threw the book to Zheng Dafeng. Zheng Dafeng pushed the book to the Taoist priest with both hands. The Taoist priest hurriedly threw the book to Old Chef as if he had received a hot potato. Zhu Lian was confused at first. Just by looking at the title of the book, he knew it was a proper book. However, Old Chef didn't even need to flip through the book's contents, nor did he need to look through it. Just by looking at the age of the book, especially the many folds on the pages, Old Chef knew something was wrong. With a calm expression, he reached out to push Chun Lingjuan's head away and quietly put the book away. The group sat around the table. Nuan Shu was in charge of serving tea and water. Xiaomi distributed the melon seeds and gave Zheng Dafeng an extra bag of dried fish. It was a welcome dinner for Zheng Dafeng. Chapter 994. On the second day of the second month, the dragon raised its head. Doe pointed to the east, where the horned mansions first appeared, and spring returned. It was the sign of the growth of all living things. Birds and beasts grew horns and plants grew scales. Spring plowing and farming began. The imperial courts of each country would hold a court meeting on this day. The Minister of Rights and the Minister of Military Affairs would lead hundreds of officials to present agricultural books to the monarch. It implied that the important matters of the country lay in worship and war. However, the foundation of a country lay in agriculture and the fields. The emperor invited the officials to a banquet to drink Ichuan wine brewed with ancient methods. He bestowed upon them knives, rulers, and other items made of white jade, indicating that the officials were all gentlemen and that they must be careful in judging and weighing state affairs. The empress was responsible for bestowing a number of green pouches to the titled madams who entered the palace. Nominally, they were all personally sewn by the empress, not by the hands of the palace maids. The green pouches contained various grains and fruit seeds for them to be given to their relatives, friends, and children in their respective families to pray for a bumper harvest and a bumper harvest in the new year. At the same time, it also implied that the granaries of a family of scholars knew etiquette. Usually in Huaihuang County, since ancient times, every family had the custom of eating a bowl of dragon whisker noodles in the morning on the second day of the second month. This day's pancake was also named Dragon Scale. On this day, the women of the small town and the women waiting to be married had to stop needlework. According to the older generation, this was because the dragon had just raised its head. If they were to thread a needle, it might hurt the dragon's eyes and cause displeasure. Chapter 995. As the old saying goes, a man who is idle is blessed with leisure. Since he had nothing to do, and being idle was a form of enjoyment, Lu Xianyang brought the round-faced lady with the alias Yu Qianyue to tour the northernmost part of the Aquarius continent, leisurely and carefree. They strolled along the long coastline, and Lu Xianyang would gather at the sea every day, bringing along pots and pans, stewing a pot of seafood, to the point that Lu Xianyang had forgotten the taste of seafood. Whenever Lu Xianyang stopped to rest or take a nap, the round-faced girl in cotton-padded clothes would sit quietly beside him. When Lu Xianyang returned to the Sex Mountain, he found that blacksmith Ruan was still forging swords behind closed doors. His junior brother, Xieling, was seriously in seclusion. It was said that he wanted to completely refine the treasure that couldn't be bought with money. This treasure was given to Xieling by the third chief of the Baek Okekyung building. It was a 7-colored glazed pagoda, half a foot tall, with 9 floors. Each floor had a plaque hanging on all 4 sides, so there were a total of 36 pieces. Lu Xianyang was very envious and couldn't help but sigh. It's so good to have a good ancestor. Chapter 996. Not far from the eastern gate of the small town was a relay station. It was built around the same time as the Huaihuang County Yamen. The official name was Rugu Relay Station, but the small town was still used to calling it Chicken Crow Relay Station. Just like the crab shop, the people of the small town were not only fond of giving nicknames to people and things, but they were also good at it. Today, Zheng Dafeng strolled all the way to Chicken Crow Relay Station. The post house official was born in the small town. In his early years, he was a Suli of the Dragon Kiln Manufacturing Department. Since he had just moved his nest, he was not of a high rank. He worked his way up step by step from a courier and finally became a leader. When he was young, he and Zheng Dafeng were good brothers at the gambling table. Often, Zheng Dafeng would bet on big, and he would bet on small, and he would always win money. The two of them would then go to Huang Ernyang's shop to drink. Anyway, Zheng Dafeng was the one who bought on credit. This fellow had accumulated quite a lot of money through this. It was said that he had recently started working for his good-for-nothing grandson at a certain courier shop. Today, when he saw Zheng Dafeng, who had disappeared for many years, he was very concerned about Zheng Dafeng's well-being. It was just that the post house official had a lot of work to do. When the two of them were catching up, there would often be a courier carrying a bag of documents coming over to check on them. Zheng Dafeng did not want to disturb this old brother of his who was busy with official business. The post house official was stunned for a long time. When he asked what Zheng Dafeng was talking about, Zheng Dafeng hurriedly said that it was nothing and strolled out of the relay station. It was all that guy Chun Pingan's fault. Because of him, Zheng Dafeng had become so paranoid. When Zheng Dafeng went down the mountain, other than to the relay station, he also went to the Immortal's tomb. Because today was the 3rd of the 2nd lunar month, Zheng Dafeng went to the Confucian temple. However, he did not go to the main hall to pay respects to the sages who ate cold pig's head meat. Instead, he chose a side hall and faced one of the statues. He clasped his hands together and murmured something. It was rare for the man to be so solemn. Zheng Dafeng didn't even bother to return to his yellow mud house near the east gate of the small town. There wasn't even a female mosquito there. Just thinking about it made him sad. Forking off the road, Zheng Dafeng found a secluded place and hung his sword talisman. He took out a talisman that could conceal his body and rode the wind towards the Oxhorn crossing. Zheng Dafeng shook the talisman on his fingertips. Zheng Dafeng named it the Wall Persuasion Talisman, also known as the Gentleman on the Beam Talisman. The man sighed sadly again. He only felt that this kind of precious talisman falling into his hands was really a waste of talent. The business of the package shop at the Oxhorn Ferry was SOSO. Zheng Dafeng put his hands behind his back and walked into a deserted shop. The female cultivator of the Pearl Hairpin Island behind the counter heard his footsteps. When she raised her head and saw that it was Zheng Dafeng, she rolled her eyes and immediately lowered her head to read her book. Zheng Dafeng leaned against the counter and said with a smile, "Sister Guanqing, I haven't seen you for a few years. You've grown up." The man spoke the last few words with great emphasis on the language. Chapter 997. The scenery at the Spirit Gathering Peak was indeed beautiful. Back then, when the bamboo tower was built here, the guests who enjoyed the scenery here all said that Mountain Lord Chun was ingenious. The yellow orioles in the mountains sang in groups, and the clouds outside the cliff were like dragons and snakes in front of people. Xiao Mo said, "Mr. Zheng's hometown is even livelier." Chun Pingon laughed for no reason and said, "Zheng Dafeng said that we scholars read old books, and that absence makes the heart grow fonder." Xiao Mo nodded and said, "Mr. Zheng is a very talented and knowledgeable person. He is different from a hypocrite who pretends to be a Taoist." Chapter 998. Chun Pingon sat up and turned to look. Wei Pai had rushed over from the cloud-padding mountain, dressed in a snow-white robe and wearing a golden earring. It was no wonder that the cloud-padding mountain had the most female officials in the Aquarius continent. Chun Pingon smiled and asked, "Is Zheng Dafeng's alcohol tolerance that bad? Is Wei Shanjun still not full? Are you here to have a second drink with me?" Zheng Dafeng was probably drunk, for he did not return to his residence on Luo Pa Mountain, but found a place to sleep in the Mountain Lord's residence. Wei Pai rubbed his forehead. Drinking was easy to get to the head. There are two things, one official and one personal. If it was not official, I would not have come to disturb Mountain Lord's cultivation in the middle of the night. Chapter 999. A place's environment nurtured a place's people. In the vast 9 continents, things had changed with the passage of time. A place had a place that could suppress others, such as the 10,000-year-old parasol tree in the Tongyi continent. It was the same for the Aquarius continent, which had mountains and rivers in the shape of a water bottle. In the depths of the earth veins, there was a great void realm with layers of restrictions. It was vast and boundless. Other than the 2 sides facing each other, there was a square iron box covered with ancient seal scripts floating in the air. Below the wooden box, there was a simple tray that looked like a wooden board that lifted the iron box. Dog Xie sat cross-legged in the great void realm, with his arms crossed. He had a look of approval in his eyes as he said in an old and experienced manner, "You have broken through 2 layers of the mountain and river restrictions and used your Dharma treasures and brute force to break through 3 layers. It's already quite a good achievement for you to be able to come here. Isn't there a story in the book about visiting a friend on a snowy night? You can come here in high spirits and return in full joy. Look, it's snowing. It's a huge snowfall." When she said it was snowing, it was really snowing. Chapter 1000. Sueon County, Yenzhou Prefecture. The moon was like a hook. The wild goose was returning to the south. Dressed in a long green robe, they walked on a stone arch bridge under the moonlight. Beside them was a young man with steady footsteps. It was Chen Pingon and his disciple, Zhao Shuxia. Zhao Shuxia gently stomped his feet. There was nothing unusual about the stone bridge other than its sturdiness. He asked, "Master, the name of this bridge is so big. Is there a reason?" The arch bridge under their feet was called the Wan Nian Bridge. Chapter 1001. Of the ancient top 10 and 4 alternates, 2 of the alternates were here Sage of Rights and Mr. Marquis of the 3 Mountains and 9 Marquises. According to the realm, they should be divided into 3 groups. The first group was of course Sage of Rights, Mr. Marquis of the 3 Mountains and 9 Marquises, and Zheng Juzhong, all of whom were at the 14th realm. Then it was Yu Xian, Lu Mang, Bai Jing, and Xiao Imo, all of whom had not reached the 14th realm. At the bottom, of course, was Chun Pingon, who was not even at the upper 5 realms for the time being. Only Li Shixing had a special identity, and it was extremely difficult to accurately define his true realm. Chapter 1002. Today's Zhou Qinggao, who used to be the leader of the Jiaxin camp, was indeed the number 1 admirer of Cheningguan, as Zheng Juzhong joked. When Chen Pingon was guarding half of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, Zhu Gong once asked the young Chen Pingon to allow him to go to the top of the city wall. He wanted to consult with Chen Pingon and review the battle situation together. Later, when the members of the Confucian Temple and the moon-supporting mountain confronted each other, Zhou Qinggao did not hide his admiration for Chen Pingon at all. Yu Xian glanced at the ashes of the talisman that Zheng Juzhong destroyed and nodded, "Good talisman." However, the talisman writer's means were a bit insidious and deliberate. Obviously, he was deliberately targeting the young Cheningguan. Chapter 1003. Mr. Marquis of the 3 Mountains and 9 Marquises only glanced over, and that group of great demons of the same generation became much more restrained. Chun Pingon sighed with emotion. This was the unique aura of a top 10 ancient tycoon's candidate. It was different from the later generations on the mountain where a person's reputation was valued. There would be many masters who only had a superficial realm. Qi cultivators who had personally participated in the Battle of Ascension to Heaven or witnessed the battle with their own eyes could reach the peak of the human world step by step. Without exception, they were all very familiar with fighting. Not to mention others, just take Xiao Imo, who was by Chun Pingon's side, who was the target of his Q-sword back then, for example. Any one of them would be so-called invincible in today's world. Although this was the first time they had met in the outer world, Chun Pingon seemed to have a deep relationship with this Mister of the 3 Mountains and 9 Marquises. It was all thanks to the 3 Mountains talisman that they were able to make a sudden detour to the moon-bearing mountain. Chapter 1004. With one hand holding the wasteland world, the Sage of Right's Dharma form took a step back and stepped on one of the talisman mountains as a support point. Millions of golden talisman in the mountains wrapped around the Sage of Right's ankles like crazily growing vines. In an instant, the majestic Dharma form that was on the verge of shattering recovered to its original state and returned to its peak. The Sage of Rights raised his hand again and opened his 5 fingers. A golden round mirror appeared. Circles of inscriptions were the natal words of the sages of the Confucian temples. Every golden word that spun on its own like a vortex was attracting the constellations that were listed as constellations in the celestial maps of later generations. It attracted countless rays of light from afar and converged into the vortex. At the same time, from the vast world side, there were golden lines that rose into the sky and drew arcs. Every arc formed by words was an entire book of sages. Chapter 1005. He was like a god. Sage of Right stepped on the 2 talisman mountains, and his dharma suddenly doubled in size. His feet carried the talisman mountains as if he was walking in boots. Sage of Rights turned his body sideways, but he left the golden mirror formed by the natal characters in its original place. It was like a soft but tough wall, continuing to block the fairy's path. Sage of Right slammed into the wasteland with his back, and the whole river behind him was like a new track that had been laid out, diverging from the original green path. Sage of Right's dharma figure leaned back and raised his feet one after another, then stomped heavily on the void. The dharma figure leaned back even more, shifting the direction of the fairy bit by bit, pushing the entire wasteland into the Ho River. The back of Sage of Right's giant dharma figure and the entire wasteland produced a burst of dazzling brilliance. Only Li Go and the nameless man were left among the group of ancient demons that had come to watch the show. The nameless man could not help but take out the wine pot again and gulp down a mouthful of wine. He laughed heartily. There's no need to doubt. No matter how invincible that person from the Baek Ok Kyung building is, he definitely can't beat the little teacher. Li Go asked, is there anything to be happy about? Chapter 1006. Chun Pingon asked, what exactly happened in the depths of the earth veins in Yu Province? Bai Jing had already returned to the appearance of the girl in the mink hat. He did not answer the question. You know the general cause and process of the battle between fire and water, right? Chun Pingon said, I've only heard some rough inside stories, mostly bits and pieces. I barely know a few important points. That earth-shattering battle between fire and water was, of course, the most important fuse. Chapter 1007. The gates in the sky of the Confucian Temple were not connected, so Chun Pingon and the other 2 went to the sky again, and then returned to Howran through the gate in Aquarius Continent. Since they were in the sky of Aquarius Continent, they did not need to rush, and went to Dali Continent. The 3 walked down the stairs. Overlooking the continent's land, mountains and rivers, clouds in the sky and water in the bottle. Xiego, who was bouncing around, turned his head to look at Xiao Imo and sighed. Xiao Imo, your outfit is supposed to be rustic, but it's different when you wear it. It's so handsome and real. It's just like a poem. There's a scenery in front of you that you can't see. Xiao Imo was silent. Chapter 1008. West Peak of the Aquarius Continent, one of the many vassal states of the Dali dynasty, the capital of the Jade Xian nation. At night, when the lanterns were lit, a middle-aged Taoist who was lying on the table at a fortune-telling stall by the roadside quivered and raised his head. His eyes were still in a drunken stupor. He picked up the wine pot beside him and drank a mouthful of the soul-returning soup. Only then did he let out a long sigh and prepare to pack up and return home. The Taoist reached into his sleeves and secretly weighed his money pouch. He had earned some silver fragments, but most of them were copper coins. On the streets, there were some children of eunuchs who came back late from their excursions. The grass was green, and the willows yellow. They were drunk and frivolous. They rode their horses back to the city at night. It was as if the horses' hooves were stained with the fragrance of spring grass. The middle-aged Taoist began to tidy up the bamboo tube on the table. He picked up a few copper coins used for divination. Due to the years of caressing, the coating was shiny. He threw them into the bamboo tube and pulled up a tablecloth with surnames written on it. Usually, the Taoist was here to read fortune and misfortune, read people's palms, and predict their marriage. He also knew how to read characters and write letters on behalf of his family. The capital's expenses were not as high as those in the counties of the Jade Xian nation. As for guessing people's surnames, it was an unorthodox, personal skill that he learned from little charcoal in his early years. These were all unorthodox ways of the pugilistic world. She still remembered that one of her dreams when she was young was to travel the pugilistic world with her master and earn big money together. After finding a busy street, she first helped to beat the gongs and drums to gather popularity. Her master would perform a few knife hands, then perform the hitting the big stone on his chest, and sell dogskin plasters and strength pills. There was no need to worry about sales. She was very familiar with these businesses and was extremely good at it. Of course, it was a little tough, but after all, it was just another dirty business that was not presentable. Money that went against one's conscience was not worth earning. Chun Pingon smiled. It seemed impossible for him to mingle in the pugilistic world with his first disciple. Even if he, as the master, was willing, Pei Qian himself would probably think that it was nonsense. Chapter 1009. After the awakening hibernation, the fighting finger ding, the spring equinox was about to arrive, the fighting finger rin. The courtyard was quiet, and the wind melted the moon. The female ghost in a red dress, who was called Miss Shui by the Taoist, had changed into an elegant white dress and came here to admire the flowers. After all, the female ghost was also a woman. There were so many dresses in the house that they filled several large chests. However, she was just admiring herself. She had nothing to do with the kind of woman who would dress up for her lover. After all, the middle-aged Taoist was really not good-looking. He was also a vulgar and mediocre man who only cared about money. Chapter 1010. Early in the morning, the sky was just beginning to brighten. The Taoist priest who was about to pack up his things and leave started to cause trouble. The Taoist priest held a peachwood sword in his hand and performed the Taoist steps. He recited a Taoist formula that he had copied from somewhere. Please listen to me. The ancient times had the void, the sun and the moon intersected, the mountains and rivers were magnificent, refined into a golden elixir, no leak, no leak, no leak, from the land of dragons and snakes. The Taoist priest swept out his leg, rolling up some fallen leaves on the ground. He stood on one leg, his right hand holding out a sword, the tip of the sword stopping on a leaf. Chapter 1011. It was noon, and the sun was high up in the sky. Chun Pingon placed the bamboo pole on the ground and stood up. He lifted the wine pot and took a sip. Let's talk while we walk. Lu Chen stayed in the old man's house for the time being and strolled with Chun Pingon by the stream. Others did not find it strange. Uncle Bai, the mining official of Cut Jade Mountain, had always been on good terms with the outer sect receptionist. Chun Pingon said, "It's nothing but an illusion. Why did Hierarch Lu have to mobilize so many people? Why did you violate the etiquette of the Confucian Temple and sneak into the vast world without permission? Unless..." Chapter 1012. At the entrance of Luo Pa Mountain, Xiaomi was sitting upright. Her golden pole and green bamboo cane were placed on the table. The Taoist priest was chatting enthusiastically with a young Taoist priest who was wearing a lotus crown. The Taoist priest claimed to have met the mountain lord at the end of Qingping and was also a close friend of Taoist Jingqing. The little girl in black kept staring at the two Taoist priests' teacups. She saw them drinking but could not see the bottom. She did not even give them a chance to refill their teacups. She was bored to death. She subconsciously stretched out her hand and twirled the green bamboo cane. She twirled the cane lightly, causing it to creak. She immediately stopped. As expected, the foreign Taoist turned his head to look at her. Xiaomi hurriedly apologized. She then straightened her back and stretched out her hand, indicating that the two of them should continue their discussion. You're tuning into the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.